This is Where Did the Road Go? Our aim is to explore the fringe, to be true skeptics and question openly, to investigate the paranormal, bring light to the dark corners of history, and give a voice to the shunned of science. We deal in mystery and the important questions that these subjects bring to light. What is reality? Who are we? And why are we here? Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com for a full show archive, links to all our social media, upcoming schedule, and much, much more. Now, join your host Soraya on this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And welcome to the show. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us on Patreon. There's going to be more and more content coming for anyone who signs up as a Patreon for the show. You can find that right at wheretheroadgo.com. For $3 a month, I'm going to add more and more extra stuff, and eventually we'll have a members area as well, and some merchandise. So, thank you again for everyone who has helped out so far. And tonight, we are doing part 1320 of UFO history with Mike Clelland and Aaron Gulyas. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Hello.
how's it going?
I do believe it's part 5.
Part 5, and what year are we up to?
We are up
Or
to the
decade.
1990s.
We're in the
Okay.
90s, part 3. I think.
Because the 80s took the 80s took 3 episodes to get through. I think.
Yeah, 2 or 3. I think we touched on the 80s and then did 2 full episodes of the 80s.
Yeah.
And we probably could have done more.
Oh, yeah.
Because everything happened everything changed in the 1980s, I think is what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing that changed in the 1990s is the internet.
Yeah, for better and worse, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You had easier access, but also a lot of garbage put out there.
Yeah, the signal-to-noise ratios just sort of, went way beyond anything that had ever really been part of the field, and the sifting through it is still out there today. You go on like Above Top Secret or any of those sorts of message boards, and there's always these noobs coming in with, hey, what do you guys think of Bill Cooper? Do you think he really knew something? And then there's like the old timers are like, I can't believe these kids these days with their iPods. So it's sort of this endless cycle of retelling the old stories, even more so than it was before.
So, yeah, let's start, I think, with the Belgian Triangle wave.
Wasn't that the 80s?
That was at the very end of the 80s going into the 90s.
Now, I know very little about that, so there's not much I can say, except there's one really cool picture that I think came from that
Yeah.
kind of a semi-blurry picture from, basically looks like someone's lying on their back shooting straight up. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's got is that the triangle with the lights on each of the points and then one in the center? Something
yeah, it
like
looks
that?
just like it was done with a little shaky hand, and it's got a great mood to that picture.
Yeah.
So, what I do know from that is that this is all, and it's very hard to know what's true or what's not true when it comes to like government sources. But basically, the Belgians were calling up the English and saying like, "Is this yours?" And the English were calling up the Belgians, and it's like, "Not ours." And then everyone was calling the Americans, and the Americans were on the scene, and they were like, "Well, it's not ours." So they were all trying to figure out whose secret weapon it was, and everyone was doing that all at the same time. So a lot of wires got crossed.
Yeah, and there was it was a few years ago. Oh gosh, probably more than a few years ago now. But it sort of came the question of whether or not the photographs were genuinely of something that was in the sky or whether they're a hoax. That came up again with one of the Belgian UFO organizations continuing to say it's real, it's a real flying thing, wedge, I guess. And then there was a Belgian TV special news segment or something where some guy said, no, this is it was a hoax. I did it. I was dumb kid or whatever and was having fun. But was that one of the things that was on Unsolved Mysteries.
Probably, yeah.
I think I remember. I think it was like, well, it would have been 89, 90, 91, something like that. I remember seeing this and being, I was probably like in junior high, and I was like, wow, it's not a saucer or a cigar shape. That's pretty cool.
Well, and the thing is, this is one of the first big things with the triangles.
Right.
And I'm still kind of, I mean, I lean toward them being something governmental, but I can't say that with any assurity either.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest explanation. I mean, that's the one that, if you were to just sort of say, what is it probably? It's like, well, it's something weird that nobody really wants to acknowledge they're working on. But then it's one of these things, and I know it's not an internet thing, but the internet would just sort of make this sort of thing explode, where you've got the Belgian triangles, and then it's just this wave after wave of triangles in all of these different places, especially out west. And it became sort of the new morphology, the new object morphology shape that it changed into. So it's an interesting sort of story for how it kicked off that trend.
And I always wonder if the phenomena is mimicking us or if we're mimicking the phenomena.
Oh, well, if we knew that.
Well, that's the ultimate question. Or, someone, who's writing the script, who's doing the ultimate stage managing, are they sampling our minds? And it's my understanding that, triangle shaped craft were a small part of the reports, right from the beginning. And there became a point when they are now a larger number of reports. And one of the reasons that makes me feel that they're let's just say legitimate as far as authentic unknowns. Authentic unknowns. Let's put that one. Yeah. So is that I have a number of owl accounts where people have seen owls in association with these, and I don't think that would play out to the same extent if it was a government secret project. And I did sit next to this is so you go to a UFO conference and you're like basically allowed to turn to the guy next to you and say, so what brings you here, and so I did that to this one guy. He was English, and I gotta figure out this guy's name because I did look him up online, but he told me this incredible story, and he had like a little booklet with him with magazine and newspaper clippings and stuff that he could show. So he had visuals that he was carrying around, so when people asked this question. So he was in England somewhere, a triangle flew over him, and I think he stepped out of the car, and he thought to himself, gee, I wonder what the top of that thing looks like. And the next thing he knows, whoop, he has a full outer body experience. He leaves his body, he's floating above in some sort of, ethereal state. He's floating above the thing, and he gets a view of it, and then he goes back into his body. And then he got obsessed, fully, Roy Neary from Close Encounters. He got obsessed and built a model of what the top of the triangles look like, because nobody knows, right? Everyone, they float along, and everyone sees only the bottom. Yeah. And the top, let me just see if have you seen close-ups of the space shuttle? And how it had those tiles that were all packed in place. Yeah. The surface of the top was like tiles, but they were a little bit, they fit more like a tiled roof rather than a smooth flat tile. So they were a little, well, how would you say it, one stacked on top of another with a slight, each one having a slight angle. And I have no idea why that would be, but so that was very, very, my sense is that if a government secret project was, hovering along, and somebody stepped out of their car and had the thought, gee, I wonder what the top of that thing looks like, they probably wouldn't have an out-of-body experience. True. But for some reason, this fellow did, yeah. So I don't know if that happened in the 90s or not, though.
Of course, I hear, weird craft and out-of-body experience, and the first thing I think is sort of psychotronic weapons. Or
it's always a possibility,
something like that. So
quite possibly, yeah. I mean, that's that, and then and if it is some exotic propulsion system, who knows what they're using? Something that that is an anti-gravity, what would that do to the person like sitting under it?
Right.
Would it, warp their consciousness in a way that would allow for an out-of-body experience?
I would think so. I mean,
that's a great big. Why not?
Leads to the question. So what happens to the pilots? So how are they shielded? Yeah. So, which means that's pretty impressive. That not only are we, if it's if we're manipulating some sort of exotic technology, that we found a way to protect certain people from it, but leave bystanders to be victimized. So
yeah,
which sounds typical.
The Hudson Valley sightings also featured some of the triangle craft, but they were more V-shaped, I think, than actual triangles.
Boomerang, yeah.
Yeah. Which you see again later in the 90s in the Phoenix Lights.
Right.
But all right, so let's see what else happened in the 90s. Jacques Vallee released a lot of books.
Yes.
Well, he did the trilogy. Were all three of the trilogy books from the early 90s? I think one of them might be like 89 or something.
Yeah, Dimensions was, I think, 87, actually.
Yeah.
87, 88, 89, somewhere in that range. And then he put out Confrontations and Revelations. And those were the last two. That was 1990 and 91.
Okay. And those, and I will say those three books all lined up. Anyone who reads them should just start at the first one and just go 1, 2, 3. They blur together. I don't know which one is which. They all have that kind of new agey title, and they all sort of. But those had such an impact on the way I frame this stuff.
Yeah.
My favorite is the last one, the Revelations. Just because it go, if I'm thinking of the right one, the one that goes into talking about Bill Moore and talking about Bill Cooper and the Benowitz stuff and all of the sort of deception and sneakiness that sort of camouflages whatever aspects of the phenomenon might be truly anonymous and which are being manipulated and used to sort of cover up human misdeeds. That's just my favorite one out of the book.
And he does talk about oh God, I'm drawing a blank on his name. The Area 51 guy.
Lazar.
Bob Lazar. He does talk about going to the Queen Mary and having dinner with Bob Lazar in Los Angeles somewhere, and not somewhere, on the Queen Mary, and that's an amazing part of the book because I don't think that. Jacques Vallee said, he was obviously a physicist. He spoke like a physicist. He's met a lot of scientists. He doesn't doubt that he was, working as a physicist. And at the same time, there was these odd little things that, that showed up where Bob Lazar, and this is the only time I've ever seen this referenced, was in this Jacques Vallee book, where Jacques Vallee claimed in the conversation, I'm doing this from memory now, where Bob Lazar kind of said, well, at that point, those months are kind of blurry. I don't really remember much from those months. And then he said something really cryptic, like, they were taking a lot of blood at that point,
Yeah.
And it was just, it's this cryptic little stuff, and it's like, wow, that is such a spooky insight, and you don't really hear that much in, I guess if there is such thing as mainstream reporting of Bob Lazar, in the other, reports where it just seems to be he's like this, noble whistleblower.
Yeah, he's either portrayed as the noble whistleblower or the sort of confused and confusing scam artist, and both ends of the spectrum just work with little sort of Lazar sound bites, and it's a very sort of cut and dried thing, and then you get Vallee, who actually spends some time with them, right, and sort of draws them out, and we get these like those weird gaps in the cryptic. They were taking a lot of blood. I mean, I love that because it just opens up this just a little glimpse through a little crack in a doorway to just weirdness that I want to hear more about why they were taking his blood, and
yeah.
It's just a much better approach to the personalities and the events than most people present.
It makes him sound more like a victim as well, because
Yeah.
it sounds like they were messing with his mind, maybe drugging him to some degree and checking his blood to see what kind of effect it was having.
Yeah.
And the impression I get was that he was meant to leak all this stuff and be
Right.
this unwitting
Right.
voice of Area 51 to for whatever reason, probably just to point the curious in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. And Dimensions came out in '88.
Okay.
So it was 2 years. Then he did these two books, and then he did UFO Chronicles of the Soviet Union, and I think that's the first U.S. book, anyway, written about UFO reports in the Soviet Union.
I think it was.
That was '92.
92? Okay. Yeah, it was. I always sort of think about that and all the sort of Soviet UFO stuff as not just part of the cold medicine messing with my brain, not just part of the UFO sort of chronology of events, but also that early to mid 90s just flood of declassified information from the former Soviet Union that made its way west. And I was sort of thinking about this interesting. You have all this stuff about spy networks being uncovered and evidence of just how deeply the U.S. government was infiltrated, especially back in the 40s, and then alongside it, you've got the UFO stuff that was largely ignored by the mainstream. The UFO community picked up on it, but a lot of them used it just to sort of plug little leaks and whatever their own pet theories were, rather than looking at it in a more discrete way, like Vallee did in his overview of it.
Yeah. And around the same time, I don't have exactly what year he first published, David Jacques came into the scene.
Was it Secret Life?
I think Secret Life, and then he actually published something early on, which was more of a straight history of the UFO.
Yeah, the UFO controversy in America.
Yeah, and was that a full book?
Yes, it came out in the 70s. It was basically his PhD dissertation from Indiana University. My old alma mater, or at least part of it, and it was basically just a straight ahead narrative history of the UFO movement, heavily sort of focused on the sort of NICAP government secrecy angle rather than contactees or general weirdness.
And that was 1975.
Yeah, and then he went from there to the hypnosis abduction thing. Interesting thing about, I got to tell this story about David Jacques is I met him in, when was it? It was 1997, spring of 1997. I was at Hanover College, little 1,000-student private liberal arts college in southern Indiana, and the faculty member who's the advisor of the history club was amused and interested in all this UFO stuff, and Jacques was a historian, so that works for the history club. So we brought David Jacques onto campus to meet with some students and have dinner with us, and then give his usual big lecture in the auditorium. So that was pretty interesting. My one question I had for him was, so what do you think about contactees? Because that's what I thought was interesting, and he was very dismissive, and I was thinking, you hypnotize people and get stories out of them, and you're unqualified. But no, the contactees are crazy. But I was polite. I was sort of awestruck by the fact that David Jacques, who had been on Art Bell's show, was sitting in the same room with me. But his presentation was very good, and half my friends thought there might be something to it, and the other half just couldn't stop laughing at his in quotes evidence. But I always thought he was a interesting guy because he had credentials. He was at Temple, tenured faculty at Temple University. I mean, that's no slouch. And he was one of him and Budd Hopkins and John Mack. They were the guys with this stuff back in the 90s. And Jacques has sort of outlasted them all.
True. Although I'm guessing John Mack would have still been doing research.
Oh yeah.
And who knows where he may have ended up. He'd probably be writing the book with Mike here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but John would have been well into his 80s by now. So he died 11 years ago now.
Yeah.
He died in 2004, and it's now 2015. So yeah, 11 years ago.
But he also had a similar, it's not similar to your work, but kind of in the viewpoint where Jacobs is very negative. John Mack viewed it with a much more positive spin, and it seems like that's kind of where you go, Mike.
Well, not so much a positive spin. It's just that I've been digging up this stuff and these accounts, and it's certainly not 100%, because I've certainly read and talked to people and listened to folks tell me some harrowing stuff. People are traumatized, and so I recognize fully that it's not a love and light thing across the board, though it can certainly bring about a transformative experience in people's lives. And I think that even a harrowing experience can be transformative. People have experiences they wouldn't wish upon themselves, and they end up being beneficial somehow. He did coin a term which I used a few times in this book project, which is reified metaphor. And I had to look up reified in the dictionary, which reified means to make something that's not real, like to make something real, and then metaphor, so like the metaphor becoming real, where oftentimes these stories, the accounts, not even so much what takes place on the craft, but almost like leading up to these things, these stories play out like, the dream analysis would be better suited for these narratives than the logical analysis or trying to dissect it the way an anthropologist might. These things are so full of highly charged archetypal experiences, whether literally people meeting phoenix birds and going through death's doorway, and all kinds of things show up metaphorically within these accounts, and somehow they are made real in the sense that when the people tell you these stories, they're not telling you a dream. They're being very forceful and saying this happened. These metaphoric things. So that spiritual aspect, just that one term, reified metaphor, I just think is so beautiful, and that is, and he's the one that was pointing that out. I guess I should be careful, because other folks certainly were too. Like Brad Steiger was no stranger to this, the mystical implications. Right. Where I would say that both Budd and David certainly strayed away from that and tried to treat it as legitimate. Pragmatic research. Yeah,
I think it's interesting that you bring up that term reification, because I had to explain that term in class the other day, and I had to do some looking up, because it's one of those things you hear. Well, stop reifying that, and because it can be a negative thing too, right? To take something that is meant to be abstract and meant to be sort of numinous and making it real for your own sort of rhetorical purposes. And I think we see some of that in the UFO community as well, taking something that is somewhat, things that are somewhat symbolic, and turning them into nuts and bolts government projects, right?
Yeah.
Interesting that you that term came up, because I was just
or that
thinking
like I saw the future, I saw the future, and here's what it was, and that that the future is this gloom and doom scenario, and I was like, well, that might just be a warning, that's like, how does someone from another dimensional construct actually communicate to us? When we say to the dog, good dog, what is the dog actually hearing? So when they actually show us this vision of the future, are they just, is that just how they communicate through these metaphors?
Right. And we sort of solidify it into whatever we think, whatever we really want to hear, right? Or even if it's not what we want to hear, because who wants to hear about, we're going to be forcefully outmaneuvered and destroyed by the alien human hybrids down the road. We don't want to hear that, but we might think that's the message that we need to send. When Jacobs wrote The Threat, which was, I think that's the one that came out in '97, I think. Yeah, because when I met him, he was sort of out
98.
touring the book. 98? Oh,
yep.
Okay, so that's when I met him, was 98 then. I get years confused. He sort of, it's very doom and gloom. That
one's dark. That one's dark. There's like lots of out and out, lots of weird sex stuff, and there's like rapes and I think, is that the one where there's once, I think it's that one where someone wakes up on a table and looks over at the person next to them, and they are being like dismembered, and and then they get zipped back together like a giant zipper or something like that.
I think that's the one, and
that just brings to mind the whole shamanic type of journey where they take the body apart and put it back together.
Right.
Wait a minute, are you reifying this experience? No, that's what someone was really chopped up. So
go on, Aaron.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and one thing that sort of has always struck me when it didn't really strike me at the time, because when I read it at the time, when I heard the interviews at the time, I was like, wow, they're the aliens are escalating, right? This part of my brain was like, if this is real, then it's getting very frightening. But looking back at it when I was doing just some reviewing of stuff a while ago, what struck me is it's almost as if he, and this is maybe not fair to Jacobs, but he reread a lot of the John Lear and O.H. Krill and Matrix documents, and he's like, I'm gonna just turn it up to 11, because a lot of the things are very, very similar. Now that might mean that there's a consistent, and if these are actual things that happened, then yes, that means it's a consistent pattern of behavior. But if we're looking at it in terms of constructed narratives, then what it demonstrates is that it's cyclical again. We're recounting the old tales. We're telling the old myths, and details change, but it wasn't much different. The idea of hybrids and at some point in the near future there's going to be a takeover. That was pretty solidly a part of the dark end of the mythology by that point.
So I have met David Jacobs, and I've spent time at his home. I sat on his couch, and these interviews were recorded, and I spoke with him, and he interviewed me, and I shared some of my experiences. I never did a hypnotic session with him. Spent many hours. I don't know what that would have been, probably 4 hours, and then have talked to him on the phone a handful of times since then. And there's a lot of folks out there who just want to take everything he's done and just throw it away. He's been embroiled in a mess.
Oh yeah,
with
Emma Woods.
Emma Woods, yeah. So that's a different decade. So I don't know if this is the time for that one, but so it's embarrassing all around. So, but he, but I will say that I feel strongly he's been doing legitimate research, and at the same time, I would be anyone. I don't care who it is. This is the most saintly of researchers needs to be. This stuff is very mysterious and wants to morph itself into whatever, I think that people who are the most, I don't think I think it's impossible to be completely objective in this. Right. You're going to bring some of your own subjectivity into it, and his, so I'm just saying that, he's an easy target.
Yep.
And at the same time, I think it would be a mistake to throw his research away. And I think his research, like everyone's, should be reviewed very cautiously.
Yeah, there's some good stuff there, but it's a slippery phenomenon, and
exactly,
and the phenomenon itself. I mean, sort of going back to the sort of, I forget his name, George Hansen sort of model, is the phenomenon itself wants to trip you up. Yeah, so it's that tricksterish quality again, and we anybody sort of ignores that at their peril.
And I will say, like, I feel like I've been at the receiving end of that with this book project that I've been doing, which has been all about owls. And so, like, as I proceed forward, like, I'm just like, okay, this is my theme. I'm just going to stick with the owl thing. I'm not going to stray from that. And so I just get these stories with owls. And I feel like I have been, like the carrot is dangling out in front of me, and I'm trotting after it, and the carrot, who's ever holding the stick, that I can't see with my blinders on, has just led me to this, this very, it's pretty far out, what the stories that I received, and I'm just shocked that they, so I fully understand that I was not objective. I was completely subjective in this work. But I do feel like, you know, the phenomena itself was playing with me, was toying with me.
And I think subjectivity is not a bad thing when we recognize that we're being subjective, right? So yeah, the trick is to not fool yourself into thinking that, you know, that you're being objective, I guess.
I think the thing about Jacobs is, to me, he seems like like his bias in it bugs me, but I think thinks he's genuinely doing the right thing and that he really believes what he's saying.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing: is so, like, I mean, well, how to say this? You know, you go to a UFO conference and you hear the guy on stage and you hear his talk and you read his book, and then you get him cornered in the bar and you get a couple glasses of wine in him, and then you like say, "Oh, what's really going on?" And then they kind of roll their eyes and they tell you the weirdest stuff. So that's the thing that I'm wondering what's going on. What's going on under the waterline that he's not sharing out of, I think, you know, he may not have it documented the way he wants to, or it may just be so bizarre that he can't even bring himself to bring it forward. I don't know if that's true, but that's my sense of anyone doing this work.
Yeah. And even with the Emma Woods stuff, I mean, it looks really bad when you look at just look at what happened and look at the things he told her to do and stuff. It looks pretty creepy. But when you view it from his point that he was trying to save her from these things, it's kind of like, okay, well, I can maybe see what he was doing there, and maybe it wasn't meant to be as creepy as it came off.
Yeah, but man, it came off pretty creepy.
Yes, yes, it did.
He's an easy target at this point, you know. So and that's and at the same time, I mean, the guy was very gracious to me, and I mean, I played with his cat, you know. So how I can't, you know, So yeah, so
and
I can't.
He did just release a new book called Walking Among Us, The Alien Plan to Control Humanity.
Yeah, which I think is just I have not read it, so I can't comment on it. So.
Yeah, I haven't read it either.
So it just came out, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's pieced together of some stuff that has shown up in his previous work. Not all of it, but sections of it. And that's only hearsay on my part, so I can't say for sure.
And we're still in 92, and the other thing that happened in 92 is Kenneth Ring published the Omega Project.
Which I have never read.
You should.
And everyone says it's on my shelf. And though I do have, there's a great interview. It's a YouTube video. It's like, I don't know, it's like 11 minutes long of Kenneth Ring and Terrence McKenna sort of walking together, talking about their research. And it is so, oh my gosh, it is so powerful. The one thing that Kenneth Ring comes up with, so when UFO abduction researchers collect their data, you know, they have these little questionnaires, and one of the questions is, you know, were there traumatic events in folks' youth?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that might mean, you know, unwarranted sexual, you know, some dark sexual thing might have happened to a child in their youth. And then Kenneth Ring found the same thing with the people who had near-death experiences, that they had also statistically didn't match the norm where they had traumatic experiences in their youth. And that's in a funny way, that's what the shaman has. You know, the shaman will have a period of what's called shaman sickness in their youth, which is a term that you know, in other cultures would understand. Here in the West, we don't really have a framework for that. But you know, some traumatic, harrowing event takes place in this child's life, oftentimes a near-death experience, actually. But so yeah, you get into this. It makes the mystery that much more mysterious.
And in his introduction to the book, he actually says, you know, he wrote the first book, so this is the Omega Project.
The Omega Project. Yeah, I can't remember which it's.
The Omega, I think it's the Omega something is the first book. But anyway, which is just on near-death experiences. And I think his book publisher sent him Communion. And he took one look at it and said, I don't do UFO stuff. And his publisher said, just read it. And so he sat down and read it and went, oh my God, this is connected somehow.
Yep.
And that's why he started doing this project where he took all these people and polled them and found these weird these weird connections between people who had near-death experiences and UFO abduction accounts, and I mean, not that it explains anything, but the first time I read that, I thought, well, what the hell? This doesn't make any sense. Why would these two things be connected?
It doesn't make any sense until you have to step back and say that what we're dealing with is probably more complicated and more mysterious than little men in spaceships.
Right.
Then
exactly.
it starts to make sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In 92, I was just getting out of the idea of nuts and bolts spacecraft, So that was one of the things that pushed me to the point where I said, well, there's no reason nuts and bolts aliens would have any connection to near-death experiences.
Right. And then, that exact. Once you make that leap to what if they're not aliens and nuts and bolts spacecraft, then the possibilities then you get into the Terrence McKenna stuff and all of that.
And then if you take Strieber's stuff from in fact, the last nonfiction one he wrote, which is Solving the Communion Enigma, he talks about this a bunch, but where UFO abductees see dead relatives during an abduction experience.
Yes.
Well, now here, let me jump in. So now David Jacobs would say, like, oh, so under hypnosis, I said, so it's your dead relative. Who is it? It's like, it's my father. So what does your father look like? Oh, he's bald and skinny and has big black eyes. So, that would be the David Jacobs retort to that would be that what these people are seeing is a carefully orchestrated screen memory of a dead relative. And now I'm not saying that he's right, but I certainly suspect that on some I'm certain that that some screen memories have been implanted, and those have been dead relatives. So it's a little blurry. It's neither all or nothing. I think it's a blurry mixture of either and. So
right. Well, I mean,
So.
Have either of you read the Strieber book?
Solving Communion Enigma? Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a long time ago.
The more recent one that came out 25 years after, which I think came out in 2012. I think.
Yeah. But
it's a short little book. It's just a little over 100 pages.
And it has some of the really weird stuff that happened to him that he didn't talk about previously. But you talk about like there's one case in there where a fireball goes by outside, and the parents are looking, going, is that a plane going down? What's going on? And then the kid comes down and says his dead brother just came to see him and said he's okay.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah.
And it's like it's not really necessarily is it a screen memory, or is there some connection between what happens to us at the point of death and this altered state, perhaps, that these things exist in?
Yeah, I mean that's the question, isn't it? Is this all just one thing?
Yeah.
Well, not just one thing. Is this one massive, crucial thing that could answer a whole lot of questions about the nature of life and consciousness and the soul and whatever
and reality?
Yeah.
And this is where I often say, like, when you get thinking people that talk about the UFO stuff, it doesn't take long before they start asking the big questions. What is God? Why are we here? What happens after we die? Those questions arise when you are confronted with something as mysterious as the UFO phenomenon.
Right.
So then 1993 was the X-Files.
Oh, that was wonderful. That was awesome.
And it just kind of broke this whole thing into mainstream culture. I mean, wasn't already from people like Whitley Strieber and Budd Hopkins, now it was on television and everyone was watching it.
Yeah, especially after the first year. I mean, the first year ratings-wise was kind of iffy, and then it just ballooned. But I remember that year. Really, it was like my senior year in high school, and I remember I'm like 18 years old, and I forget which episode it was. I think it was the pilot, and I'm sitting there. I was the only one in the house, and the sun had gone down, and I was terrified. I mean, it was just the way it was shot, and the suspense, and it was incredible. And then the sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark ending, where they're putting the little implant in the giant Pentagon chamber, and it was just, and like from there, like about a month later, I found Howard Blum's book Out There, which sort of details his investigation of the MJ12 thing, and then like 6 months later, I was at college and discovered Usenet and alt alien visitors and Gopher directories full of text files from Paranet, and it's just, oh my gosh, the X-Files is real. No, the X-Files guys read a bunch of this stuff probably, but
Right.
it was, and I'm just from reading and talking to people for years, I'm not the only one who felt that way. It was a complete, it was a gateway drug for a lot of people, I think.
Absolutely.
It's funny because I didn't really get into it until after, good grief, it was probably nearly 2000 before I actually got into the X-Files. Probably, because it's interesting because I had made a conscious decision not to get cable and didn't have any network television, so I didn't have any access to television. So it was until the X-Files got re-released on VHS that I could pick them up at the video rental place that I started. And the initial pilot had a couple things in it that were interesting. One of which was I can't remember. They were in their little hotel room side by side, and they both woke up at 3:33 in the morning, which is straight out of the literature, and it's very interesting because that number sequence. That's what, 93. That's 20 something years ago, 22 years ago or something now. So yeah, that was obviously just lifted from the literature. They had simply read that number gets reported a lot by people who have this experience. They woke up at 3:33 in the morning, and it just gets plugged in there. So it creates a sort of tape loop thing where then other people use it, and then other people claim it, but that all traces back to actual research.
Yeah, it was, and the government cover-up angle was just, I mean, they did a great job that first season of dropping little hints. And what's funny is a lot of the hints, it ends up going completely off the rails by the second season with Scully's abduction and everything. But that initial first season finale where they've got the little alien embryos in the jars, it's, and then the Deep Throat guy gets shot dead at the end, and they shut down the project, and I was just like, oh my, is that it? Is it coming back? It was just, I mean, it was just such, and the thing is, it sort of alternated this conspiracy serial with the more sort of anthology Monster of the Week stories, and so it never really got completely tired during that first season. Came close a couple times, but it never got completely routine.
True. And we'll see what the newest season is going to be like very soon.
It'll be awesome no matter what.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Mike Clelland and Aaron Gulyas.
Where Did the Road Go can be heard first and usually live on WVBR, Saturday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com to ask questions of our live guests through the chat room. Where Did the Road Go is then re-aired on Dark Matter Radio and Deprogrammed Radio. You can download all shows for free on the website, and you can subscribe to us on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, or Vimeo. Additional content can be found on our video channels. You will also find our upcoming schedule, book reviews, blogs, free book downloads, links, and more. We are also on Facebook and Twitter, and if you want to help support the show, there are links to donate to us. Everything you need can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And that's a little outdated at this point. They're going to make a new one of those. We're also on Intrepid Radio, which is not mentioned there, and I believe that's Thursday nights now. And we have a Patreon account, and hopefully going to be adding a second show into the mix as we get more patrons to support us, and lots of fun stuff to come. And tonight we're talking with Aaron Gulyas and Mike Clelland. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
So we're about up to 95-ish at this point. Breakthrough was released by Whitley Strieber, which I think is one of the books most people don't even know he released.
That's the second in this after Communion.
No, although Transformation was the second, but it's also sometimes titled Transformation: The Breakthrough.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Is Breakthrough the one with about the implant stuff?
You know what? I don't remember. I think it's a lot of the stuff that happened at his cabin.
Okay.
But I think it was the third in the series.
Okay.
But it didn't. I don't think it had anything. I mean, it was interesting, but I don't think it had anything groundbreaking in as much as the other books did. You know, where it didn't stand out quite as much.
Yeah. I'm looking at the description because I honestly could not remember this one. But he, in 1993, a male humanoid visitor in a white tunic takes up residence with Strieber and his wife, imparting a sense of peace and joy. I think I read that description and decided not to read the book. But the white tunicked stranger, although now I would be like, wow, I need to check this out. White tunicked strangers. So
yeah, and I think that was yeah. So that is the one I think where Strieber has an out of body experience in his bed. And looks down and like realizes he's floating above the room, and his cat is looking up at him, like obviously can see him, which I think is so perfect because that's my sense. You know, is that my cat is always like, staring off into nothing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder what's there now that the cat's staring off into nothing. Because it'd be Whitley Strieber floating in my living room there. So I'm
just picturing that. That's funny.
Whitley's checking on your progress, Mike.
I don't know, maybe, but I mean, or he likes cats, so.
Yeah.
But I thought that really struck me that the cat was aware of his, that was aware of him in his out of body experience.
Yeah. Beyond that, in '95 is also the year the Alien Autopsy film came out.
Oh no! See, so here's the thing. But I worked in film production for a little while in New York City, doing mostly TV commercials. So you'd have these super low budgets, and you'd have to build a set, right? So you have a giant budget. Your set you can have a huge, complicated, intricate set. You have a tiny budget. You basically just do two walls. You do a corner, right? You do one wall of a room. You do another wall of the room. When I watched that, I was like, they're only showing those two walls.
Yep.
This is the cheapest set. This is like the set you would do for like a low budget, dishwashing liquid commercial. So that was my immediate sense, was that this is, because all it would take was the cameraman to just take a half a step back and just shoot from slightly different angle, and you'd see the third wall. You never saw it. So that was to me, that was a sort of conclusion. The conclusion I came to, given that, was that this was obviously hoaxed. Whatever. There's a lot of other things that made me say it was obviously hoaxed too. But I will say it is an elaborate hoax. It wasn't. It was a
well done hoax.
It was a well done hoax where someone had to put down a serious chunk of change to create the model and so it didn't seem like it was a bunch of junior high school pranksters trying to pull this off. Yeah,
it was a well promoted hoax. I mean, promoted from whoever the hoaxers were to the money people and to the network. And I don't know if there are any out there. I don't think I've ever seen any interviews with Fox executives who actually greenlit this. That's what I want to say. I want to talk to those guys.
And I'm sure they got the ratings.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. And they got Jonathan Frakes in. Commander Riker was there, hosting it. And the great thing was that the amount of footage they had was so small, they just turned it into a general sort of Roswell crashed spacecraft documentary, and then it was the Al Capone's vault of flying saucers, right? You've got all of these talking heads leading. I think Kevin Randall was on there, and Stanton Friedman and stuff, and none of whom actually said much of anything one way or the other about the autopsy video. I watched it last summer, and they're all very careful to hedge their bets about it. It's funny. I rewatched it while the whole Roswell slides thing was going on. There's just many parallels. Except the video was the autopsy film was much more professionally done.
I was going to say it was a lot more professional than the little mummy on the countertop. Yeah.
Then not the poor dead kid from the desert, But
the dead kid was at least real.
That's true. That's true. It was an actual corpse, and I don't know if that's better or worse. It's like, on the one hand, it's a little more honest. On the other, I feel really bad. So, some ethical things here, but beyond the usual ethical problems in the UFO field. But it was, the Alien Autopsy film was one of those moments where, regardless of the veracity or the falseness of it, a lot of people made a lot of money, and it was for the rest of the 90s, it was one of these sort of pop culture landmark things, that The Simpsons was making fun of. You'd see little sort of parodies and things in different places. So it definitely did its job, and its job was to make money and get ratings.
So here's a question. If the X-Files hadn't done as well as it did, would we have seen the Alien Autopsy film?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I don't think so. I don't think we would have seen...
It's interesting, both Fox Network. I didn't even,
Yep, it was... Yeah, and I think the X-Files even made fun of it. The next season, they had an episode where there was some alien autopsy footage, and Mulder was like, "I think it's real." I'm like, no, it's not. But yeah, that I don't think we might have seen it. I don't think we would have seen it on the fourth of four major networks. I think it would have been some sort of direct-to-video thing sold at UFO conventions. They would have found a way to make money off it.
Right.
But because, let's see, it came out in 96, you said?
95.
95. So it had to have been in the works before the X-Files really hit. As far as, because network things take a long time to ferment. So, and I think I do remember there reading about, Ray Santilli was shopping this thing around for a while. So I think the X-Files is what made Fox take a stab at it, because they could, the cross-promotion opportunities were, the corporate synergy was there, right? So it worked well for Fox. But without the X-Files, I don't know. I don't think it would have had nearly the audience.
It also the fact that filming this stuff became more affordable,
right,
in the 90s as well. Not as easy as it is now, but a lot easier than it had been previously.
Yeah, and that, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yay, we can do all kinds of cool stuff. On the other hand, you've got this just proliferation, especially in the late 90s, of hoax videos, not just alien autopsy stuff, but all sorts of lights in the sky films that look really good, look almost too good. And then it turns out, it's now people can do these special effects, in their backyards and in their, on their own
this is where junior high school kids can then play the hoax,
yes,
do hoaxes stuff, yeah.
Yes.
Apparently, it was made fun of twice on the X-Files. Once in a show called Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Yes. Yep.
And they had a video called Dead Alien, Truth or Humbug.
Yep.
And then they were watching a video of an alien autopsy, and Mulder, he says, "Mulder, this is even hokier than the one they aired on the Fox network."
Yep.
You can't even see what they're operating on.
Yeah, that's the one I forgot about Jose Chung's From Outer Space with Charles Nelson Riley.
I love that one. That was
that was
just, it was just so nice, because you could see that Charles Nelson Riley was so happy to be back in action and on the set, working again. So.
So, also in 95, although some would argue this is not UFO related, other people think it is, would be the Chupacabra starts getting reported in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I never know where to put the Chupacabra. I don't think anyone does. Conceptually, physically, I'd probably try to put it in a cage or something. But it's like a lot of the cryptozoological stuff. If anything, this is the stuff that would be the easiest to prove, right? If we can just get a sample of something we could test, we could determine what this is. But there does seem to be a kind of paranormal-ish aspect to it that nobody's really ever able to get convincing enough evidence. It's that tricksterish thing again.
And it's changed too. By the time it hit the U.S., you're seeing mangy dogs being called the Chupacabra, and
right.
It's like, that's not what this thing was. The Puerto Rico sightings are much more bizarre.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's a blood-sucking sort of little demon almost.
Yeah. And couldn't it, like, didn't it have like some kind of spiked tail, and it had like it could leap into the air and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of a, goat sucking spring-heeled Jaques sort of, and it had, I don't know if this is the right way to say it. It had a personality, right? It was like it was not just some sort of predator. It was evil. It was malevolent.
Yeah, there was no sort of positive negative spin on it. It was just an evil monster that sucked the blood out of their animals.
Yeah. The Google image search, there's lots of things with spikes,
Yeah.
The spiked tail and spines going all the way down the back. And then a whole lot of pictures of evil dogs, which is not, like you said, not what it originally was, but it sort of morphs into that thing, which makes it easier to debunk. Well, it was just a dog.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was on its hind. If it was a dog, it was sort of walking upright, and being frightening.
And the attacking cattle brings to mind, of course, the cattle mutilations.
Right.
Although it's not mutilating them, it is killing them and draining them of blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crossover between the Chupacabra and I mean, almost like just the Mothman and Bigfoot and the black cats in England and the people reporting the phoenix, not what do they call it, like pterodactyls or big, giant phoenix birds and stuff. Yeah, so there's this whole
Garudas.
Pardon?
Garudas.
The Garuda, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's these things get reported, and they come in waves, and Spring-Heeled Jack would be a perfect example. So what's the source of this? Is it just some sort of mass hysteria, or is there some other? Is this being stage managed by a presence that's just outside the boundaries of our capability to actually perceive?
And if I remember right, the original Chupacabras also were in connection with UFO sightings.
Yeah, there was definite overlap. It wasn't every case, but it was a non-trivial number of Chupacabra events were related to sightings. Yeah.
So that's I mean, I it seems like with so many reports, there's probably something behind it, but what it is, yeah. Maybe it's a government-made creature.
There's all sorts. I mean, Puerto Rico's U.S. territory. There's all sorts of weird stories about creepy defense experimentation. Maybe this is some sort of weird genetic mistake that was too dangerous to keep, so we dumped him in Puerto Rico. That appeals to me. I think that's a good explanation for some of it. That there's some sort of island of misfit
monsters,
government experiments. Yeah, sort of island of Colonel Moreau or something like that.
Next up would be Budd Hopkins releases Witnessed.
Yeah, I have sat with Linda Corteil, who was the woman in that story, she is. I should be very careful how I say this. I heard her tell her story. I heard her share some things that were so bizarre that I don't think were reported in the Witnessed book. She had met with Cardinal O'Connor of the Catholic Church, and befriended him in this very strange way. She became sort of buddies with would go to she was living in New York City, would go to St. Patrick's Cathedral and hang out with Cardinal O'Connor, and that is just such an odd detail to this whole thing. Now, so there's all kinds of pictures she has of him with her with him now, and I also sense that, and I knew Budd, as an acquaintance, and worked with him a little bit on some of my experiences. Budd was very sharp. Budd was very smart. Budd was very savvy. Budd was nobody's fool, So and people who say that Linda Corteil hoaxed this and pulled one over on Budd, I don't think that that's how it played out. So that book talk about an X-Files story. Oh my gosh, there's that and there's some implication that of the two FBI agents or Secret Service agents, that one of them was killed because he was having a nervous breakdown and he knew too much. There's kind of it never really comes out and says it, but it has this implication that you're like, oh yeah, well, he got taken care of, and it's never really confirmed or that book. My sense is that a real event took place, and that Budd was researching it, and that some of the elements, I don't know what they are, of that book are probably some sort of staged disinformation that was planted for Budd to include in his book. Whether he included it in his book or not, I don't know. But that's just my sense, was that that book is extremely interesting. I would be cautious how that book gets interpreted, because I feel like there's elements within that book that could be. Anytime you have like a government mysteries thing like that, I'm always wary of the overall story, because my sense is that tiny elements have been placed in there. I don't have any proof of that, but that's just a concern I have when I read a book like that.
One of the things that always interested me about this case is the sort of split in opinion between what was in Hopkins' book and then what Linda Cortiel has said afterwards, and the sort of discrepancies or omissions from the book. And this afternoon I was looking at, and Linda Cortiel has there's a massive website. I think it's lindacortielcase.com, I think, and it's got like refutations of skeptical interpretations of it, and things that were left out of this argument or that argument. It's massive. I couldn't even begin to look through it all this afternoon, and I don't think Linda has done all of this herself. It looks like there's some other people working on it, but it's massive. So anybody who wants to get up to speed on that case, in addition to what was presented in Hopkins' book, it's there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it out there, and if all you've read are the sort of critiques of the sighting, it looked like there was about a refutation for every critique that existed. It was exhaustive and exhausting.
Wow.
Do one of you want to tell people, in case they're not aware, what the basic outline of this event was?
I can. So I can't remember the date. Sometime in the early 90s. I don't know the exact date of the event. There was an event that took place at around 3 in the morning, I'm guessing. I can't remember exactly. Where sometimes referred to as the Brooklyn Bridge sighting.
Yes.
People were on the Brooklyn Bridge. A giant UFO lit up the sky in a building. I lived in New York City for a long time. I'm very familiar with exactly the building, exactly the view from the Brooklyn Bridge. And a giant flying saucer-shaped craft lit up, and a beam came down, and on this beam, out a window at a high level, was a woman in a nightgown, and she floated up into the UFO, and the UFO then vanished. People claim to have witnessed this. There was a remarkable number of people who came forward, or Budd sought them out and contacted these folks, and there was also people on the ground at the Fulton Fish Market who saw this, and I think there was a newspaper spot, so people on the sidewalk were seeing it too. Now, in conjunction with that was a troop of, so this whole mystery and starts playing out. Budd starts researching it, meets the woman Linda Cortiel, and then there becomes this sort of espionage aspect where a collection of Secret Servicemen, two Secret Servicemen come forward with their story to Budd. And I don't think he ever actually meets them. I think all these stories are done over the telephone or through letters.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer to that one?
I've got the same answer you do. I think there might have been some phone contact, but I think it was mostly letters. But it really wasn't in person. It wasn't like meeting in a parking garage or something like that.
Yeah, and then so my sense is that Linda Cortiel obviously had almost like this forced love relationship with not I don't think anything was ever consummated, but it was like one of the Secret Service men claimed to have fallen in love with her, which actually shows up in another book, which is from that same era, called The Exiles, which is very good. Not The X-Files, The Exiles.
I remember that.
That's a great book. That's one of those outlying books. It's just like someone wrote it from a personal point of view, and it's very, very weird. And that side by side with the Witnessed makes for a very strange. You really gotta wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, and then it was, I can't remember who it was. Was it Javier de Cuellas? I can't remember. Supposedly it was the head of the UN was in a line of limousines, supposedly got abducted that same night, and then Budd never came forward and used his name. It was very quickly out on the internet, who he was implying, and it was the head of the UN at the time, which is Javier Perez de Cuellas, I think was his name.
Yes.
And so if the story is to be believed, Linda Cortiel was abducted in a staged event, bright lights meant for people to see. The train of limousines stops. I think their engines all stop. They also see the flying saucer and Linda Cortiel being dragged out. And for somehow or another, the people in the limousines have a missing time event. Now this is getting a little blurry for me, so I should be very cautious what I say. But the implication is that Javier Perez de Cuellas was also one of the abductees. I think I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, but close.
Yeah, that's about how I remember it as well. Especially the limos from the UN. It was very much the classic. What happens to cars when there's a flying saucer around, right?
When this is right at the height of the Berlin Wall crumbling.
Right, yes.
So that gives it a date. So that would have put it about 91, 92.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're up to about 97.
3 more years.
97.
I don't know if we're going to make all 3 years tonight, but let's see. Because this next one's pretty big, and that's the Phoenix Lights.
Yeah. Yeah, he says.
And again, you have the triangle UFOs, and of course the whole ridicule factor with this too. When the mayor or whatever came out, was making fun of people who were having the sightings.
Yeah.
Only later to admit he had them.
Symington was that?
Symington, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was definitely there were tons and tons of sightings in this time period.
Yeah, and it was over Phoenix and part of Mexico, right? Sonora.
Yeah, I think so.
So it was widespread. It was widely witnessed. It wasn't just 2 guys and a donkey seeing these things.
A lot of video. This is the other thing. Now people have video cameras. It's 1997. It's not, again, as common as it is now where everyone has one on their phone, but people have them and pull them out and start taping these things.
And Lynn Katai, who did an excellent documentary, which is worth watching, she was videotaping these events in the days and weeks leading up to this event.
Yeah.
And she was a witness of the event. And in the updated version I have the book at home and I have not read it. So in the updated version of the book, she actually comes forward and claims to have channeled information from these from these beings. So here's this woman who's a physician. She's a PhD doctor.
She was anonymous at first.
She was, I think so, and then I'm not sure if she just got so obsessed with the case that she came forward.
I had her on about a year ago. I don't remember her saying anything about having any channeled information, though.
I think, I should be careful how I say this, but I think that's correct. She did channel some sort of letter, or she did some automatic writing, which I guess is a form of channel. then I'm going to be very cautious. Maybe I should, take that back and say that, I am remembering something, and I feel pretty strongly I'm remembering it correctly. And this was
it could be.
And this is, I think, in her updated book.
Which she released about a year ago or so.
Yeah, 2 years ago. So, yeah.
It was, and didn't Symington come out a few years ago and say that he made some sort of weird flip flop?
So at the time he did a press conference, which is in the Phoenix Lights movie, and he says, okay, we now have definitive proof of what was the source of the Phoenix Lights, and then he from behind the curtain at the podium, steps out this guy in a ridiculous rubber mask with rubber hands with long fingers, and and everyone laughs, and then years later, James Fox was doing a documentary. I can't remember which documentary it was for, and was interviewing Fife Symington and to ask him about this, and then right there on camera now ex-Governor Symington, having been embroiled in all kinds of corruption scandals.
There was some stuff.
Yeah. So he says, "Oh yeah, and I saw the thing, and I was very much I was a pilot in Vietnam, and so I feel like I'm capable of knowing what an aircraft at night looks like, and this was definitely he basically came out and said, I saw a UFO, I saw an object from outer space." And James Fox had no idea stepping into that interview that that's what he was going to be getting.
It was very weird that he would just come out and sort of flip-flop like that. Which and then there were the conspiracy theories that, as governor, he was under pressure from the Air Force or the powers that be to downplay it, and then why would he so casually say, "Oh yeah, there was something there."
Doesn't care anymore?
I guess, but if they wanted to take him out,
Yeah.
Just like they did John Mack, right? That was an assassination. Nobody has ever died a natural death in the UFO field.
Yeah. Well, there are definitely some suspicious ones.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
John Max is just tragic.
Yep. Just a horrible accident.
So yeah, Phoenix Lights, and then Strieber publishes Secret School. And that deals with his memories of these beings when he was younger that he had repressed the whole time.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah. That one was weird. It's at that point when that one came out that regardless of what sort of truth might be at the heart of what he experienced, I sort of started thinking of it as the Strieberverse. He's building up this sort of unified continuity. Going all the way back to his childhood and then going forward from the initial sort of communion era sightings to the white tunicked man giving him peace and joy or whatever. He's building this sort of universe, this internally consistent lifetime of strangeness,
but he's
on a quest to understand.
But he's not unique in that. A lot of people who suddenly have an experience suddenly realize, oh my God, I've had this happen before.
Yeah. It's and I think Strieber, as a novelist, does a really good job of weaving it into a very good, understandable narrative that unfolds little by little. He uses those talents to make this whole sequence of events in the story much more enthralling than it would be from some other experiencers. It's really well done.
Mike?
I agree, and that book had a big impact on me, it's that it's as what you call Strieberverse. His set of experiences are so multi-layered and so complex, and again, he is a very skilled writer, and I think that has worked against him. That he is such a beautiful writer that it's very easy to dismiss him as creating a form of fiction because that's the same as saying, like, you find a UFO photograph that's too clear. You say, it's too good to be true. We have to dismiss this.
And it didn't help him that he was well regarded as a novelist, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with supernatural subjects. So when he starts, coming out with this, it really did work against him, sadly.
And then around off and on during the 90s, but especially in the late 90s, we see the Mexico City sightings.
Yeah, those were some of the first of the sort of advent of, along with the Phoenix Lights, you got
the video cameras.
Yeah, popular video is sort of how it was, the democratization of video production, right? You've got everybody, like you said, with these or nearly everybody with these devices, and they're smaller. I mean, they're not pocket-sized, but the Sony Handycam style, you can carry it with you for long periods and have a lot more footage, produced a lot more affordably as far as the recording medium and stuff. And so we start seeing all these things. And I think I remember with the Mexico City films, you had the same events being filmed by different people, right?
Yeah, all over the city.
Yeah, so you can see the same lights moving in the same ways, but from different angles, which, I mean, it's I can't think of any real practical way to hoax that. So we come back to the question of, if we can sort of just take it as a given that, okay, they were filming something that was actually there to be filmed and not something they created.
Right.
What was it? So, which is a much more interesting question than, whether or not what they filmed actually was there.
And there was a lot of sightings and a lot of objects. It wasn't, like the Phoenix Lights were a series of lights that seemed to be held together.
Right.
Whereas these things, I remember seeing them just shoot all over the sky.
Yeah, it was almost like some of them looked more like astronomical events rather than crafts sometimes. It looked like almost directed meteorites sometimes.
Yeah.
Just shooting all over the place.
And coming out of one another as well.
Right.
Which is a traditional UFO thing.
Yes, the mothership.
Yeah. Mike?
Actually, I have to say that I know so little about the Mexico sightings that I'm going to have to just remain silent because
right.
there's not much I can add to this.
Never saw the videos when they came out?
I did, and it was always kind of, I never saw like a comprehensive analysis of how all of the shots, melded together. Though what I will say is that Mexico, like much of South America and Central America, has a completely different openness about the UFO phenomenon than us in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's much more
open
and much more accepted and treated much more seriously.
All right, so let's see. We have time for one more thing. Let's do the 50th anniversary of Roswell. That was 1997.
Yes, that's
where we get Colonel Corso's book.
Oh God, yeah. Colonel Corso, the most important man in the 20th century, if you believe his book, because he was responsible for everything that makes our modern us, well, in the aliens, but without him managing the whole thing. It was Corso's book. Day After Roswell was great. One of my favorite things about it was who wrote the foreword?
Was Bill Burns? No, it was the congressional guy, the really old one.
Jesse Helms?
Jesse Helms, yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Jesse Helms or Strom Thurmond. It was an old racist. But the thing is, Corso had been one of his aides early on in his career, decades ago, and the story was, asked, for a forward, and the guy was like, "Oh yeah, this guy, he's a smart guy, worked with him, great patriot," but nobody ever told Helms / Thurmond what the book was about.
Yeah,
he thought it was just some sort of general memoir or something, but no, it's about Roswell. That caused some controversy.
Didn't he have to recall the book?
Yeah, it had to be recalled, and the new edition didn't have the foreword, something like that. So that was sort of a black eye on it. But I remember listening. I can't remember what radio show it was, but a few years ago there was some discussion of this, and one thing that the people on this show said that really sort of resonated with me was that Day After Roswell was one of the last UFO books to just sell like crazy. I think I was talking to Mac Tonys about it years ago. We were on a show, or I heard a show where he talked about, he says he remembers, and I remember it too, stacks of these things sitting at Borders and Barnes & Noble.
Sure, yeah.
It was huge. Because of the 50th anniversary thing in Roswell, and that was a massive event. And you had the Air Force coming out with their explanation, and you had Congressman Schiff, I think, from New Mexico, sort of triggering that, wanting the Office of Management and Budget to look into it, and the Air Force's sort of several years of mutually exclusive explanations for what actually happened at Roswell, from it was a weather balloon to it wasn't a weather balloon, but it wasn't a flying saucer, all of these things. And every time anybody from the government opened their mouth about this, they sounded so non-credible that it made the equally non-credible but more consistent UFO-oriented explanations sound better. Because at least, which lie are you going to believe, right? Or which screwed up interpretation of events are you going to believe? I still think that whatever happened at Roswell was something that the government was up to that they really do not want anybody to know about, and so they've just been muddying the waters ever since. I just think it's not a disinformation campaign as much as it's been a massive confusion campaign. And there's two explanations. One, it's a deliberate attempt to muddy the waters, as I said, or it's something they have to deal with, but they just don't care enough to put together a coherent story, because nobody's going to believe what they say anyway, unless they say it was aliens. And I think even then, if the Air Force were to come out and say, it was a extraterrestrial craft, and we did pack it up and send it off to Hangar 18, and we've been using technology from this craft to power to create cell phones and microprocessors. People would say, so what are they really trying to hide?
Yeah.
Because that can't be true, because it came from the Air Force. So they can't win.
We're actually jumping 7 days into the past to prevent natural disasters and.
That was a horrible show.
I like that show.
Oh God, it was like Quantum Leap but dumb. Quantum Leap but with unlikable people, except for the Russian.
The Russian was pretty cool.
She was cool, but she should have been the one jumping back. I didn't like the lunkhead they had actually doing the stuff. They should have put the Russian woman. She should have been the main person.
So Mike, your thoughts on the 50th anniversary?
I remember I read the Day After Roswell at the time, and my thought was, why would this guy make this up? My sense was that someone took him aside and said, "Okay, you're getting old. We'll set you up or your kids up really well with some sort of trust fund or something like that if you create this piece of disinformation." Yeah. And this is maybe my own paranoia at exactly what you said before. Here's a guy from the government telling this story. Like, why should we trust him? Here's a guy that's a colonel in the army, wasn't it? I think it was army.
Yeah, lieutenant.
And why should we trust him? This is like what this is what. There's a whole campaign to psychological warfare and reasons to put out false stories, and so if it was disinformation or misinformation, what was the purpose? What was being served? I don't think, was he, basically the question is, was he taking orders to create this book? And then Bill Burns wrote everything in the book, and Corso did almost, very little.
Yeah.
And Bill Burns is very funny when he talks about the writing process, because he says, Corso was, almost deaf at the end, and we talk on the phone, and he couldn't hear what I was saying, and I would ask him a question, he would answer the wrong thing, and that's how the book got written. And then there was tons of pressure to get that book out in time for the 50th anniversary, so that book was completely fast-tracked, and Burns is someone who knows a lot about UFOs. He's very well informed about the UFO issues.
Right, yeah.
And So what was basically a train wreck from with multiple trains crashing in all kinds of different ways, and so and it was I don't believe the story the way it's played out in the book. Is there some elements that are true? Maybe, probably, could be. Why? So that's my sense, is that when you read that book, you are not getting a crystal clear view of what happened. But I think that there's probably little bits and pieces in there that are based on real events.
I also think that at this point, when the Air Force or someone looks back and says, "Okay, let's see what we really have," they may really just not have much of anything.
Right.
Or it has been so compartmentalized that no one really knows.
Right.
The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Right. Or this is sort of a variation in the compartmentalization thing. I mean, to what degree could government investigation of weird anomalous stuff be farmed out to private corporations?
Yeah.
Like sort of Wackenhut or Blackwater style things, because then it's, the way I understand it, there's different rules about what needs to be reported to the public, right?
True,
because it's a private corporation, not a government.
Yeah, you can't do a Freedom of Information Act on a corporation.
Right, exactly. So I think I heard Walter Bosley talking about that in an interview once, that could be a possibility. That's interesting. That's actually really plausible. I was just earlier today, when I was sort of going through the list of 90s things, I was like, I remember something about Corso that I read that I couldn't remember, and I was sort of Googling around. He was supposedly part of a secret society called the Shikshini Knights of Malta, and there's some like really out there JFK assassination people who sort of link him and this organization to the Dulles brothers and Bill Colby and Bill Donovan and all these other intelligence guys as being a part of the JFK thing. So there's Corso might have some deep connections to that would have made him amenable to some kind of disinformation campaign. If somebody were to come to him and like you suggested, and
do the secret handshake.
He'd be like, okay, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. I'll put my name on this. That's fine. They kiss whatever ring or seal or secret belt buckle they have, and go off and publish this book through their minions who control the media. So,
and it becomes an amazing big seller.
Yep. Yeah, and will forever. I think if you go to outlet malls with those little book outlet stores, you can still buy remaindered copies for $1.50 a piece, and get yourself four or five different editions of it.
All right, so we are out of time.
Oh, we are.
What year did we get to?
We
97.
got to 97. We still have a bunch of interesting stuff in the 90s for next time, and we'll figure out when that's going to be. Mike, when's your book going to be out?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. Soon, before Christmas is the thought.
Okay.
After Thanksgiving, I suspect I can say safely after Thanksgiving, and I can almost safely say before Christmas. But that's the hope.
Okay.
The title is The Messengers. I should be pumping this thing. I'm done. So I'll be playing promoter here for the next 10 seconds. The title of the book is The Messengers. It will be published through Richard Dolan Press. And it'll be very easy to find. And believe me, when this thing is out, I am going to be shouting to the heavens because I spent the last 3 years living on a credit card, like writing this thing. So
let me ask you this: how many books has Nick Redfern written while you were writing this one?
Oh, probably 11 or something like that.
No, that would be the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Nick will be the guest next week on the show, talking about one of his 2 new books.
And Nick is one of the few. Nick has actually read this book in an earlier version. He did the initial edits for The Messengers, which is the title of the book. And the subtitle is Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. And Nick did the initial edits, so he has read the book a couple times and offered some very good suggestions on just how to join chapters together a little more cleanly and such. So
how many pages is this going to be?
I think it's going to be dang near 400.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is about 400 less
Nice.
than I thought you were going to end up with.
Yes, we talked about that a little earlier. Yeah, I was a little worried it was going to be, like whatever, you have to have a wheelbarrow to get it home from the bookstore. Yeah.
But you did take some of the stories out and put them in a secondary book.
At some point in the future, there will be hopefully soon in the future, there will be a companion book called Stories from the Messengers. And it right across the top says the companion book to the Messengers. And there's just stories. Some of these stories are very long and very complicated, and there's threads going everywhere, and to tell them succinctly is impossible. So there was no way to actually just kind of say, oh, here's an interesting story, because it would have lasted 8 pages. And then you would have lost the thread of the chapter, what I was trying to get across in the chapter. So I kept a file of those stories, and they're fascinating, and I think it'll make for it'll be I sort of picture it like a collection of short stories, as opposed to a cohesive book of research. It's just a collection of stories.
All right. And people can find you online where?
My blog is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, and you can just Google my name, and it'll come up right at the top of the list.
And Aaron, are you working on anything?
I am. I've got a book that is in preparation for publishing, probably February or March. Sort of a general overview of conspiracy theory and conspiracy theory culture, and sort of connecting some of these theories back to, some of the nuggets of historical fact at their heart. That's I'm waiting on galleys for that to copy edit, so that should be out sometime in the spring. And I'm finishing up a non-paranormal thing on teaching using informational and newsreel footage in the history classroom. So all those shorts that Mystery Science Theater used to make fun of, I get to watch. I've been watching a whole lot of those, and a whole lot of them without the jokes, which is much less fun.
Are these going to be out academically or?
Yeah, the conspiracy theory one is from McFarland, who did my Contact ebook, and the film one is part of a series on teaching history of the film from Rowman and Littlefield, and it's just like a small guidebook. I think it's supposed to be like 45,000 words. It's not very long. So, but yeah, that was mostly of interest to history teachers. But
right.
But yeah, those will be out. Well, I don't know when the one I'm still writing is going to be out, but the other one sometime in the spring, I think.
All right. And where can people find you online?
Hiding under a rock. It's election season, so on Facebook it's Aaron John Gulyas, AARONJOHNGULYAS, or search for the combination of first name and last name, and it should show up.
All right. I thank both of you for spending some time with us tonight. We're going to take you out with some Psyche Corporation. This is Strange Machine.